Hey everybody! Welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening and welcome. This is episode number 126 of CAF's Warbird Tube, and tonight we take a look at an interesting project being undertaken by the Central Texas Wing of the Commemorative Air Force. Before we get started though, if you could do us a favor, if you haven't already done so, please take a second to like, share, or subscribe and make sure you follow us. And if you do follow us on YouTube, click the bell icon and you'll get notifications about new episodes of Warbird Tube as they're posted. Now, as you're watching the presentation, you might have some questions. Just type them in the chat box and we'll save time at the end to answer them before we sign off. So joining us now from the Central Texas Wing is Joe Ensminger.
Okay, the cockpit was donated by Butch and Diane Stevens. They bought it from a junkyard, donated it to the CAF, painted it, and sent it to Dallas. Right about the same time when That's All Brother was acquired by the CAF, the real That's All Brother. It was at headquarters for a little while, and then when That's All Brother got assigned to our unit, the trailer came with it, and we had it loaned to us for a little while, and we used it for parades and air shows and that type of stuff. And then one of our members got interested in improving it, and before we invested time and effort in it, we talked to headquarters and got it assigned here permanently. When I first saw the cockpit, my very first thought was, we've got to make this a simulator. And so it took a few years for that idea to kind of take root, but that for me was always kind of the long-term plan for the cockpit. Butch is really interested in simulation, so he's been a great supporter of the project. And it's been really fun to kind of see it go from sort of a junkyard relic back to something that we're using to tell the story of not only That's All Brother, but of D-Day and all the other history that's associated with the airplane. Okay, so this is the front side of the cockpit. Just like That's All Brother, this cockpit was came from a junkyard. We found it. Butch painted it up. When it came here, we actually gave it a full restoration. So we didn't repaint it, but we took everything out interior-wise, all the controls, all the panels, and we took it kind of back to bare metal and restored it just like we did with the real airplane, That's All Brother. One of our members spent a lot of time and money putting it on a trailer so that we could make this cockpit mobile. This trailer is easy to tow. It's really stable. It makes it real easy for us to take it on the road. And we actually have it set up where we can take it on the road as a simulator. So we can take it to trade shows and air shows and those types of things. And it can work as a simulator on the road as well. It doesn't have this great wraparound visual system, but it does get the point across, and it does let people experience what it might be like to fly a C-47. Okay, so the visual system is a 270-degree wraparound visual system. There are a bunch of different ways to do this. There are real expensive ways, like in the level D simulators that the pros fly. This is sort of the budget method of getting a real immersive 270-degree wraparound display. It's driven by 3 projectors, and then each projector is projecting a portion of the screen, and it's blended together in software so that it looks like one unified view. We made it 270 degrees so that the pilot could see the engines and the propellers and the cow flaps. So all those things move and animate and do what they would do in the real airplane during flight. And flying a C-47, looking outside and looking at the engines and doing those things is an important part of flying it. So we wanted to make sure that we gave the people that were in the airplane that experience. The projector's made out of wood. So this is a wood structure that we built and assembled. When we put it together in the hangar for the first time, we got a lot of raised eyebrows because it's pretty big, and it isn't immediately clear how this was going to work. But now that everybody's kind of seen the end result, it's making a lot more sense for people.
Okay, so I joined the Commemorative Air Force in June of 2021, and I was looking for something fun to do with airplanes, and came to this beautiful place, and there was a bunch of nice airplanes. My dad flew P-38s in World War II, and I'm an Air Force brat, so very interested in airplanes. But one thing I noticed when I was here was this funny looking round theater, whatever I guess it was, and but it was only half done, so I thought that was something I could do. I'm not a pilot, not a mechanic. I can tell stories and things, but I'm also mechanically minded, and electronics, so that seemed to be a good fit, because they said, hey, we're building a simulator. So I added the roof to the simulator where we can mount the projectors. Also painted it, caulked the inside of the theater, and also painted that.
Okay, so the whole simulator is driven by one big computer. This is a gaming PC that one of our members built for us. It has a pretty high power graphics card in it, and it runs, the software that runs the simulator is called X-Plane. So this single computer does all the flight simulation and all the display. And that makes it really, really simple for us to manage and make work. A lot of bigger simulators might use more than one computer. We've managed to squeeze it all in one. And then this box is what all our hardware interfaces to. So all of the sensors that monitor where the controls are and drive the instruments, all those sensors come to these electronics in here, and this and the computer work together to integrate it with the simulation. This is actually the circuit breaker box from the airplane, and so we integrated all these into a piece of the C-47 with the intent that we'd actually mount this in the airplane at some point, or in the simulator at some point. But it really has become kind of an impressive display of what it takes to build something like this. One of our members did all the wiring, and it really looks, it looks pretty neat, and what it does is pretty neat as well.
Okay, this is our primary electronic interface box. It's inside the circuit breaker box that came out of the airplane with a few things removed. It has 6 microcomputers here, Arduinos, and only 4 of them are working right now. We have 2 ready for expansion for future projects. Most of this stuff is off-the-shelf hardware. It's just stuff you have to hook up to connect to the electronic switches and controls. And it's both input and output. A switch changes there, it goes in, finishes up in the computer, it changes how the simulator acts, and sometimes the simulator sends back other things. For example, how much fuel is in the tank of the virtual tank in the airplane. Some of those things, which are not off the shelf, are products that Joe came to design and put together, had some circuit boards made. One of those is for the voltage and amperage gauge, and the other one is for the fuel gauge. So those things are quite unique and created just for this project.
Okay, one of the things about this project is we actually had to learn about the real airplane, and so if you kind of look in here, you can see all the original control cables that in the real airplane would run all the way to the tail and all the way to the different components of the airplane that actually control it. Here, we actually had to re-rig them and cut them all off and build custom sensors. And so you can kind of see our elevator control here, and our rudder control, and our aileron control. And all those sensors are wired into these electronic components, and they run back to that big green box, and that gets integrated with the simulator. So there's a lot of work looking at maintenance manuals and figuring out how things worked, and then figuring out how to turn what was a real airplane into a simulator, and all these are custom made, some 3D printing, but just a lot of just kind of trial and error figuring things out. These hydraulic components, these are the original hydraulic valves from the airplane. So we took these off, took them apart, figured out how they worked, and then we built custom sensors to turn them into electrical switches instead of hydraulic valves. And those also run through and do the electronics. And so we kind of repeated that pattern all through the airplane. This is a big part of it. In the cockpit, on the other side of the panel is a big part of it. But all that work together is what we did to kind of make all the controls and levers and all those things work the way they would work in the real airplane. I fly That's All Brother as an SIC, and so it was real important to me when we built this to try to make it as close as we could to operating the actual airplane, because for training purposes, if we end up using this for training, we don't want people to learn the wrong thing just because this works a little bit differently. And so, a lot of the feel and the controls and the procedures, we tried real hard to stay faithful to the real airplane. So we built this with the intent of making it something we could actually train in potentially. And so one of the pieces of that is an instructor station. And so this component here, this is where the PC is hooked up. This is just a normal computer, but we have this piece of software running that's integrated with the simulation that lets us set up all kinds of different scenarios. So from this station or from the iPad we have down there, whoever's doing the instructing can put the airplane in the air on final approach, or they can put them on a runway, they can change the weather, they can change the time of day. They can simulate failures, so we can fail an engine from here, we can simulate a hydraulic failure. All that can be done from here, and then there's a little iPad we have stuck down there that has a mirror of that display that an instructor can use if they're sitting in the seat. So they can do the same things we can do from this instructor station. They can walk around, they can be in the instructor position, and they can do the same things here that they can do on the screen. And so that's one of the cool things we use for training, or when we're just giving flight experiences in the simulator, we can quickly set up a takeoff or a landing or those types of things without having to get up and come back here. So one person can run the sim. It doesn't have to be an instructor and a separate pilot in the seat. We're in the cockpit of the simulator. Everything in the airplane is wired up that you would expect to be for flying the airplane, run through the procedures. So obviously the primary flight controls, the aileron rudder, the throttle, the mixture, the prop lever, all the trim levers, and then down here something unique to this, not unique, but something, the tail wheel lock in the C-47, again, that's modeled and also connected. And then we have it's hard to see back here, but our hydraulic controls, so our flaps and our gear. And then sort of unique to the C-47, if you look at the floor, is the gear latch system. And so when you're first learning to fly this airplane, the landing gear, believe it or not, is one of the trickiest pieces of the airplane to learn. And so we took the time to make sure that worked correctly. So putting the landing gear up and down, all the motions and all the gauges that you need to check, they all work as they would work in the airplane, so that we can actually teach people how to do it here rather than in That's All Brother. And then we didn't wire up the instrument panel yet. This is a big project, an expensive project that hopefully we'll get some people excited enough about that they'll donate the money for us to do that type of stuff. So our compromise is we put this monitor in the middle, and this instrument cluster is actually real similar to the instrument cluster we have in That's All Brother. There are a few things that are different, but we tried to make it to where the avionics are similar and then the gauges are similar. We actually took pictures of the real gauges in That's All Brother, and then had an artist build us the computerized versions of them. And so these look like the gauges in the real airplane. The controls, there's not a lot of force feedback. They're just spring loaded. The control forces are a lot lighter in the simulator than they would be in the real airplane. And again, that's something that with some time and money, we'd probably invest in making it more realistic. We did make a couple of the gauges work. I don't know if you can see it, but this fuel gauge here, again, a little training item, but this in the airplane, we only want to turn that to the right, and so that's something we wanted to be able to train people to do. And that fuel gauge actually works. It's the needle points to wherever the simulator says the fuel is. And then another element, and I don't know, Blaine, if you're going to be able to see this one, but these ammeter voltmeters, again, another training item. When we have an engine failure and we run the feathering pumps pull a lot of amperage, and we want to be able to see that on that gauge. And so we actually made that work, and it actually works as it would in the real airplane. So if we feather an engine, we'll see that load on that ammeter. When the feathering pump turns off, we'll see that load fall off. We wanted to make sure we had that right, because if we do end up using this airplane for training, we want pilots to be looking in the right places and for the right cues and doing all those types of things. So now we have the simulator unpaused. You can hear the sound. the model for the C-47 we used was provided by a company called Skylabs, and they went to a lot of effort to get the sounds right and to get the flight dynamics right and a lot of those details. So a lot of the details of the actual simulation of the airplane we didn't have to do. We were actually able to get it from a company that just built one of these for X-Plane, and they let us use that model and modify it. And so they've been real helpful in the effort that we've put together here. So what you're hearing, if you sit in the real C-47, the sounds are pretty close, pretty true to life. This sounds a lot like what it would sound like in a real airplane. It's a little quieter, but we could turn up the volume and we could really kind of get ourselves immersed in the simulation, but it'd be hard to hear. On the overhead panel, this is, again, we tried to make this look almost exactly like That's All Brother. A lot of the details, so this switch group, That's All Brother has a parapack switch, it has a jump light switch, and then it also has a bailout bell we can run. You can kind of see that's modeled correctly. And then the feathering buttons are modeled. So when we feather an engine in the C-47, these buttons are electromagnetically held in. So when we press them in, they'll stay in until they're feathered. And since the airplane's running the, well, I guess we can press it here. So we can press it for a second and we can watch the RPM go down. We'll do that in flight. But what'll happen is when it gets to the feather position, this will pop out and it'll automatically unfeather just like it would in the real airplane. The mag switch is all wired up. Again, this is also something that's kind of unique to these older World War II airplanes, having a mag switch with a master mag, so we can turn the airplane off just like we could the real airplane. And then starter, boost pump, all those other things on the instrument cluster. Again, not exactly like That's All Brother. We had to make a couple of accommodations, but pretty close. And then we had a couple of special buttons. This one lets us pause the simulator so we can stop the action if we want. And then the other one is the You Messed Up switch. And that instantly lets us put the simulator back in the starting position. So we can real quickly kind of restart scenarios and do those types of things without having to get up and do any of that work. So we mentioned before that this is a lot like the real airplane. Eventually we'd like to try to get this certified as an advanced aviation training device, and one of the things we have to be able to do is operate the avionics and be able to do instrument approaches. And so this is a simulation of the actual G750, the Garmin 750 that's on the actual airplane, and it's got all the same functions. So we can go in here and we can go set up approaches, we can do navigation. It actually has comm radios. There's a service called VATSIM that actually does air traffic control services. So if we really wanted to get into it, we could integrate with that and actually practice communications and do those types of things. But all that is set up just like the real airplane. That's All Brother has a G5 for attitude. It has a G750 for navigation, a G650 for navigation. And so you can pretty much practice just like your hands are moving to the same place. These are all mounted or displayed approximately where they would be, and That's All Brother. So that, again, as we're training, you're actually practicing what you might do in the real airplane. So another little detail is like the cowl flap switches. These are hydraulic switches we made electrical. We can actually operate them, so we can go to the different positions in the C-47, and you can actually look out the window and see them actuating as we close them, and then once they're fully closed, we'll open them up again. And again, that's integrated with the simulation, and so we use the cowl flaps in the airplane to control cylinder head temperatures. We have a cylinder head temperature gauge right here. So if we were in the airplane flying the sim, we'd see the cylinder head temperatures rise and fall, and we'd be able to modulate them with the cowl flaps just like you'd have to do in the airplane. And again, we implemented these details so that we could run through the checklists in the real airplane, and you can go and actually move the real control and do the things in the airplane that you would do, so that you weren't just talking through it, you were doing it. And that's real important for training. A lot of times in training scenarios, because it's hard to actually simulate things like engine failures and things like that, you end up talking through a lot of emergencies and not actually doing them. And one of the things about training is when something really goes wrong, your brain goes to the first thing it remembers that it did. And so if your first experience training in the airplane is talking through an engine failure, there's a decent chance that when it really happens, you're just going to talk and you're not going to actually do anything. And so one of the big advantages of having something like this is that we can actually put people in those situations the first time and actually have them do the right actions and then repeat that a few times. That makes it way more likely that if the real thing were to ever happen, they'd have a better chance of doing the right thing, and not just talking through it like they might do if the first thing they're doing is just talking. And that's something I learned from experience. I mean, when learning in the airplane, Doug Rosendahl is one of our chief C-47 pilots, and one of my check rides, I just kind of did the drill by talking through it, and he was real insistent. Hey, you actually have to move the controls, and you can't just touch them, because if we really have an engine failure, you're going to want to make sure you're moving them. And that was one of the things that really got me thinking about, hey, we need to do this in a simulator, because we don't want to be, in the real airplane, we don't want to be, mashing the engine controls forward or being rough with the engines. We're real careful with them. And here we can afford to actually be a little bit more realistic about what we would do in a real engine failure. Okay, I've moved over to the right seat. We have the simulator set up to fly from the right seat for a couple reasons. The primary reason is that most of our newer pilots will be starting in the right seat, and so this is where we want people generally training from. The second reason is our visual system isn't collimated, and that's a technical term that means that as you move your eye point, what you see outside shifts subtly, and so it's not going to look exactly right from the left seat, and we can only pick one position, and so we've picked the right seat as the primary flying position. You can still fly from the left seat, but it feels a little bit like you're flying sideways. So that's why we have it set up over here. All right, well, we'll do a takeoff here. So I'm going to unpause the sim, and we've got our tail wheel locked, which is real important for the C-47. And flaps are up, and we'll go ahead and inch the power up. For 84 knots. There it is. Let's go fly. And we talked about the gear earlier. I'll kind of walk through that. We got to unlatch it, and then we've got to put the gear handle up. Our lights will go out, and we see our hydraulic pressure coming down as the gear comes up. We'll make our first power change, and then set climb power. And here's the point where we'd run our after takeoff checklist. Put the gear back down. quick flight. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of things. What I'm going to do is I've got the airplane powered up, and we're going to actually energize the feathering pump. So you'll see what that prop blade does as the feathering pump runs is real similar to what would be happening in the airplane. You can kind of see it flattening out and lining itself up with the wind, and then when it gets there, it'll automatically pop out. So that would be feathering, and then to unfeather it, we can hold that button down, and we can see that prop blade going back to the unfeathered position. And that's something, again, from a training perspective, you know, when you feather the engine, you want to look out there and see that the prop is actually feathered. So we wanted to make sure that that was something that was simulated. And then we'll go through the engine start for the airplane, so we can crank it and run it, and it'll fire up here. Do the same thing for the other engine. And then what we'll do just for fun is we'll do a takeoff, and we'll do the engine failure in the air just so you can get an idea of what that might look like. So we'll go ahead and bring the power up. So if we had an engine failure, there goes our right engine. We see the direction of control change. So we go mixture, we're going to go props to full, power to full, and we're going to identify. So that's my left foot. My right foot is dead, so my right engine I think is dead. I'm going to verify by pulling the right throttle back. We'll hear the gear horn. We're going to bring the prop back, the mixture back, so we know it's that engine. We're going to pick the right feather button. We're going to push it down. We're going to watch our amperage, which goes up, so we know the pump's running. We're flying blue line here. Here goes the prop. We're watching that prop. When it stops, we should see the button pop out on its own. So now we're nice and feathered, and we can bring the throttle up just a little bit, and then we would do those are our memory items. Now we'd go and run our engine failure checklist and make sure we covered everything. And then the airplane would just fly as normal, except on one engine, and if we were really heavy, we'd have to be really, really, really precise about how we were flying the airplane. So that's not something that we can do very often in the real airplane, just because shutting the engine off in the air, it's cooling down right now, so it's getting really cold. And if we start it in the air, we got to give it time to warm up, and those cycles, those cooling and heating cycles, are really tough on the engine. And so in the real airplane, we don't want to do this type of practice very often. We typically would simulate an engine failure just by pulling the power back and not actually shutting the engine off. And you know, that's something again that leads to sort of practicing wrong. And I think I always tell my son when he's practicing sports, I'm like, hey, you got to practice right. You got to practice like you play. This tool is going to be something that lets us do that.
Okay, so we had several different people in the wing who helped. The inside of the plane needed to be cleaned out and repainted. We had somebody who took the seats out, and they recovered the seats, so they look very nice right now and feel really good. And we have room for a lot of other volunteers. So this is to say that not everyone who comes to work, be part of the CAF, a member of the CAF, has to fly a plane or be a mechanic. They can do a lot of other projects, and they will certainly put you to work wherever we can find a fit for you.
So we are back, and this is the live Q&A portion Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights into the airplane and the simulator. It was really kind of fascinating to see how this has all come together. And before we go on, just want to share, Eric, your picture of your dad. You said he was a P-38 pilot. Thank you for sharing this picture with us. And that
Yes,
one as
you're
well.
welcome.
The typical fighter pilot pose, but he also flew C-47s as well.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So, all right, a salute to him and a little bit of the inspiration that got you involved. And again, just to reiterate what you had said at the end is that even though the CAF is very much into flying airplanes, restoring and maintaining and all that, there's something for everybody. And we've heard that from other units as well. But this is a great example of just kind of just showing up and kind of getting into what your sort of where your talents lie, and to be able to put them to good use. Here getting this whole simulator put together. A lot of work that went into this thing, and over a pretty compressed period of time, right?
Right. It only took us about a year and a half.
Which sounds like a long time if you think about
Right.
it, but like aircraft restoration, it's something that usually takes a lot longer than that. And I know you mentioned you had been to a flight sim conference, and some of the attendees there were kind of amazed at how quickly this has all come together.
Yes, they were quite amazed because, they were like asking, well, I think they were expecting that this would have taken 3, 4, or 5 years to get to the point where we're at. And they weren't even seeing the theater aspect
Right.
of this at our home place. So it is pretty amazing. I've had so many people act like, because it does not move. And
Right.
yet a lot of people will think that they are turning this way.
Sure. And just we've got some pictures from the. There we go. And you can see if you look at the very very top here, that when you do take it on the road, you actually take you've got screens that you can put up in the windows. You don't get the same wraparound effect, but how close is it to what you see in the hangar?
It's not as good, but it gets the point across. I think it's still pretty immersive, but the hangar experience is definitely the one that'll get your vestibular system moving a little bit.
Yeah, there's at the conference. How much attention were people paying to the computer and the control box? I would think that for a flight sim conference, that would be like the heart of the matter. They'd want to know all about it.
Yeah, we had a lot of people talk about it. And that was kind of one of the neat things after the conference. A lot of flight sim YouTubers were publishing pieces on this, and there was a lot of attention paid to just how it was set up and sort of the technology of it.
Yeah. How long does it take to put this together when it's to take it on the road?
I think we can break it down in about an hour and a half, and then we can set it up. I think when we set it up here was the first time we'd really done it on the road. It probably took us an hour and a half to 2 hours from when we rolled in to where we had the sim up and flying and kind of ready to go. So it's not too bad.
How often does the simulator get used when it's at the hangar?
That's a good question. I think
who's got the keys?
Well, we've got Eric. Eric's been doing a great job as kind of the initial operator when he's at the hangar, and then we've got a number of people that have been trained to turn it on and turn it off, and have started to be able to use it. So it's starting to catch on, and we've tried to make it pretty simple to operate. Kind of turn some things on, wait a few seconds, and then it's ready to go. That picture right there, when we built the screen, we generated a lot of sawdust. And that was kind of the first thing we did. Those were the first cuts of the sim, was starting on building this big screen. And when we put it together, this was just kind of a pet project of mine. I don't think the wing was necessarily prepared for the size and scope of it. And so the first time we put it on the floor,
it definitely raised a few eyebrows and got a few questions and comments about what the heck we were doing. But I think everybody's come around.
Is it in a position where it just stays in the same spot in the hangar, or do you move it around for events or things like that?
It stays in the same spot for the most part. We put wheels on it so that it could be moved. It's a little bit of a challenge when we do move it because we have to recalibrate some of the video stuff, and that can take a little while. And so we try not to move it, and we've kind of found a good home for it right in front of the museum. But for special events or things where it needs to move, we can do whatever we need to do.
Good. One of our viewers, Alan, said, Joe, this is so impressive. You showed me the workings last fall, and I know it's so rewarding for y'all to have it flying. So Alan says he's very, very pleased to see it.
Yeah, no, it's been a fun project to work on. I think both Eric and I and all the other members of the wing that contributed, and there were quite a few. I mean, a lot of people kind of dropped in and out of the project over time. A lot of people made pretty significant contributions in one way, shape, or form, and so it was a fun project to kind of see it together. And any project that's years long, it's fun to kind of see it working in the end, because you kind of have a vision for it, and seeing that fulfilled is pretty fun.
Good. About how much do each of these panels weigh?
They're not that heavy. I don't know exactly. The whole screen on wheels can be moved by 3 or 4 people.
Okay.
But the panels themselves, I'm not a strong guy. I need to work out clearly from that picture. Thanks a lot for using that one. But if I can lift it up with 2 hands, anybody can.
Okay. And then Eric, you're the one who kind of came up with the concept of the roof that is on it now.
Well, yeah, I didn't come up with a concept. Joe said, put a roof on it. And we already had some rafters or like in the middle. But I continued that process until we had a full roof. And that was, multiple steps and getting it going. And it's not something you want to walk on. It won't hold that weight, but it does what it needs to do.
And I think that's an interesting part of any project like this. We did 3 or 4 versions of the roof, and so we didn't quite exactly know how we were going to make it work. We tried something, it didn't work, so you kind of go back to the drawing board and try something different. And that's a pattern in any one of these projects that gets repeated a lot. You got to be willing to suffer a few failures to kind of get something that works in the end. And we did that quite a bit with this project, just like any other project.
Well, Joe, your background, you're obviously, you talked about being SIC for That's All Brother. You're a pilot, and you've been into flight simulation, and that, I think, was, as you said early on, when you saw the cockpit nose, it was like, this has got to be a simulator. But and throughout your presentation, it was always you kind of hedging your bets on being able to use it for training. How much more detail needs to go into even to be able to have the FAA consider it as an advanced training device?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I think, when we go through the checklist, we've gone through kind of their guidance document the FAA publishes. It sort of sets out all the requirements. And, we need a compass in the airplane, and the radios that we're using, the touchscreen, needs to probably be replaced with something physical. But those are all kind of off-the-shelf things we can do with a little bit of money. But for the most part, we meet most of the other requirements and so the big challenge is the paperwork side. So right. The project there is going to be documenting everything, and then the other question is, once it's approved as an advanced aviation training device, you really can't change it. And so, we're not done tinkering with this yet. And the only thing that it would let us do if we got it approved would be to use it for instrument proficiency checks and those types of things. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that we can't use it to train. And the real test, whether or not we can use it to train, is what some of our sort of C-47 senior pilots think of it. If they think it's a good training tool, then we'll go use it for training. If they think it needs work, we'll see if we can figure out what we can do.
Yeah, a perfect point is just the gear extension and retraction. I mean, by doing that in the real airplane, you're wearing out the motors and the hydraulics and everything else, and it's wear and tear on the airplane. Where if you can do this in the simulator, same thing with just starting the engines. I mean, how many times do you actually get to start the engines on That's All Brother, where you could do it multiple times here, and there's no wear and tear on any of the equipment?
Yeah, so that's a big part of it. I mean, it's the being able to practice procedures, being able to show people the flows, without the engines running. And anytime those engines are running in the airplane, the wing and the CAF we're spending money,
right?
And these engines are difficult to find and source and replace. It's a lot of work if we wear them out, and so it's something we want to make sure we use that resource wisely. And this lets us do some stuff outside of the airplane that shortens, I think, the amount of time in the airplane that people will need to spend to get comfortable and proficient. At least that's the goal. That's what I hope. I hope I'm proven right by that. And that's where we're trying to head. And so when we set out to do the project, the goal was to build something that could be a training tool, and also something that could be used as an experience for people that that aren't pilots. You're not going to get to go fly That's All Brother. Those of us that get to fly are very privileged and very lucky. But we can show you what it might be like with this, and I think that's a pretty powerful tool just for the mission of the CAF in general.
Which leads to my next question: How difficult is it to fly the simulator? I mean, I'm thinking about young people who have a lot of flight sim time or X-plane time. Are they able to pick up on this pretty quickly, even though it's in a pretty foreign environment for them?
Yeah. So we when we went to the Flight Sim Expo, I actually gave essentially about 110 flights in the airplane to just people. So each flight was about 6 minutes, and it was a takeoff and landing, kind of the same profile we flew in the video right there. I did that 100 times, and all kinds of, I'd ask everybody, what's your experience level? You a flight sim pilot or real pilot? And we had everybody from never flown an airplane before to somebody that says, oh yeah, I've flown C-47s for thousands of hours. And it's not hard to fly the airplane. The flying part is not necessarily the hard part of this airplane. I mean, I'm sure there's some tricks there, but the procedures part and the what to do if something goes wrong part is where all the challenge goes. But most people can get in and pretty quickly at least learn how to maneuver the airplane around, and we can coach most people through a takeoff and landing without too much trouble.
Good. Well, we've got some questions from our audience. Are you able to pick different airports with this flight sim?
Yeah, so we can pick any airport in the X-plane database, which is just about every airport in the world, and we can pick just about any time of day and just about any weather condition that we want. Where we have it set up to fly sort of by default now is Calm, France, because that's where that's Normandy, and that's kind of where we have it set up right now to fly around. But we can go anywhere and do anything.
Awesome. Yeah. See, one of our other viewers is wondering if you plan to paint the outside of the screens.
Yeah, so we are working on. We're not going to paint them, but we're going to put a wrap around them. And there are a couple of concepts there. The one that's kind of we're leaning toward is one that has again, you have 36 feet by 12 feet of signage on the outside of it, and so we were going to build kind of a collage of That's All Brother from 1944, the restoration, and then now, and kind of tell that story around the simulator, along with ways for people to purchase flights and interact with that display a little bit by with QR codes and clicking links to fly the sim or fly in the real airplane or do those types of things.
Right. And speaking of Normandy, you're planning on taking That's All Brother back there next year.
Yeah, the wing is gearing up to do an encore performance of our 2019 trip, and so we're all kind of starting that effort is gathering steam, and we're looking forward to flying back to England and France again.
All right, great. And Eric, I understand you're heading out on tour with the airplane toward the end of the month.
Yes, we've got a part of our fall tour coming up, starting off in Denver, going to St. George, Utah, then followed up with I think 4 or 5 stops in California, and then back, I think, to Arizona and Mexico, New Mexico. I'm only on the first third of that. It's a 40-day trip, so it's fun for a lot of people to get a chance to be on that trip.
Good. Does it? Do you think about your dad when you're in the airplane?
I do. My dad wrote some memoirs, and he had a couple of interesting stories about flying the C-47, a sandstorm in El Paso that he couldn't see the runway, and there were a bunch of crew chiefs in the back, and he landed really hard. He was afraid he damaged the wheels. And then as the crew chiefs were all walking out and kind of glaring at him, he just felt like they were saying, "What an idiot pilot you are! You don't know how to land an airplane." And he's like, "I couldn't see the runway." And there was another time where he had to blow out an engine, basically, where an engine wasn't doing well, because in Texas there was a big thunderstorm that he had to try to climb out of, and of course radar wasn't really there, or we don't have the technology that we have now, where you can say I can just turn here and go back to this place. So he landed after overusing one engine, and he called back to home base, and they said, he says, "You need to send us one engine." He says, "How much did you use the other one?" He told them, and they said, "We'll send you 2 engines." So
The C-47 DC-3, they are workhorses, still in use today, obviously in the CAF fleet. But we understand there's a group down in Florida that's still flying 1940 vintage C-47s in cargo every day. It's quite an airplane.
Yeah. Well, one other thing he talked about was flying in Alaska and supplying radar sites. And some of those runways actually go uphill. And so he would land going uphill, turn the plane around, leave one engine running. They would unload and then reload. And he felt like he could always take off going downhill with one engine if he couldn't get the other engine started. And he did not want to get stuck out in the middle of nowhere, waiting for parts and people to come fix the plane.
Yeah. So what's next for the simulator? What do you have more tweaks that you mentioned? What are you going to do next?
We got a lot of little details. I mean, I mentioned it in the video. Obviously, the instrument panel, that's a project, at some point we'd like to undertake. We've got a lot of little details still working, like the flap indicator in the airplane is mechanical in the real airplane, and we have that working, and we've just got to get it installed and integrated. A lot of just little improvement tweaks and making things better, and just slowly trying to incorporate feedback we're getting as more and more people get to use it and get to fly it. Just trying to listen to what they're saying about it and trying to improve where we can.
And a little plug for NVIDIA there, the video board that powers this.
Yeah. I thought you'd also mention, because I've taken a lot of our visitors to our wing into this, and they go from 4-year-olds to 60-year-olds or something, or 70s, and I think it's a great experience. The CAF is into history, living history, and I think this thing, I keep trying to point off, this is like That's All Brother. I keep trying to point them to the real airplane and the real reason why that's such a special plane. But they get to fly it, and it's easy enough to fly that I sometimes take off and then I say, "It's your plane," and they get to fly it for a while. It's great.
Oh, and a great, as you said, a great learning experience, and people learn so much more, and it stays with them. Joe, you mentioned this as well, with being able to actually run the procedures in an emergency rather than just saying, "Well, I'll feather the prop and I'll do this," but to actually do it. And the way those lessons for the pilots come home, it's a great way for the general public to bring home that feeling of World War II, and what the crews were doing during D-Day and the other paradrops during the war, or even flying cargo in India. It really brings it makes the experience come to life. I guess that's what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way, but it's an easy way of doing it. And gentlemen, you hit a home run with this thing. I just you looking at it in the video, I can't wait to get down and fly it myself.
Well, thanks.
Of course, the day I get there, you'll have it locked up, won't you?
Well, we're hoping to have more people to be able to turn it on and run it. So maybe we won't have it locked up for you.
Good. Do you want to put in a nice plug for the company that did the sound recording, because that is amazing, and also X-Plane, of course.
Yeah, so well, that's a good point. It wasn't just, there were a lot of companies that stepped up. So, when we first got the project started, believe it or not, we reached out to Basler Turbo Conversions. They did the restoration on That's All Brother, and they were real helpful with both technical expertise and then some hard to find parts. We talked about putting the gear system back together. We were missing a spring, we were missing some little piece. And I was able to kind of send them an email, and they would, they'd come through, and so they did a lot to help us out, and certainly appreciated that. And then the model for the C-47 was built by a company called V Skylabs, and it's been around for several years. I think they released it 5 or 6 years ago, and I reached out to them, and to their credit, they responded and just handed me the source code and answered all my stupid questions and got me to the point where I was able to understand what I needed to do to kind of take it to the next level, and really kind of get the system simulated in a way that they work for training. And so that was tremendous. And they were the ones that did all the detail work on the sounds. I mean, they did all the sound recordings. They did all that stuff. That we did do a couple things like the bailout bell and the gear warning horn. I actually sat in That's All Brother and recorded them on my phone, and then went and put them in the sim. So those are kind of, they sound like the airplane, because they are from That's All Brother. But
exactly.
And then a number of other companies, they're not around anymore, but the RC Allen is the company that built the ammeter voltmeters. They sent us new faceplates for those things, because you can't find them anymore. But they turned up their manufacturing group, and they did a special run just so that our ammeter range would be correct. So a lot of stuff, a lot of other interesting like problem solving things, like the ammeter voltmeter circuit. The way, a lot of it is, how do we take this 1940s or 30s, or in some cases maybe a little modern era gauge or component, and make it work with a computer. And so we had to kind of design a custom circuit. And Eric said, I designed it. I didn't. I asked a question on the internet. I said, here's my problem. How would you do this? And somebody answered with a circuit design. And I said, okay. And I went to a tool called Fiverr, where you can hire people that do breadboarding and all that kind of stuff, and printed circuit board design. And they designed it, and and some fabrication facility, I'm sure in China or Taiwan, built it and shipped it to us. And 2 weeks later, we had a working component. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that that we took advantage of to make this happen. That's what you're looking at. That picture right there is all the electronics that run the throttle quadrant. So if that's mounted under the throttle, and that again, that's something that that's probably version 20 of how we were going to make that work.
Yeah.
And Joe became a 3D printer guru through this project, I think.
Lots of work on 3D printing and those types of things. So
sure. Yeah, it's amazing technology, and it'll only continue to get better, and I'm sure you'll continue to evolve the simulators as the years go by. Just a couple of minutes left. Eric, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
It's been a really fun project, and I've really enjoyed being part of it, letting people see it. It's been well received by our CF members of our wing that were a little not sure about it in the beginning, and now they're really excited about it. And all the visitors we get, I've not heard the almost the main word I always get when people leave is they say, "This is amazing."
Absolutely. And Joe, final thoughts from you. And if someone would like to get involved, either to support the simulator or to help get That's All Brother back to Normandy, how can they get involved?
So the easiest way to get involved is to go to our website and reach out. We have a contact form. Obviously, we're always looking for funds to drive these projects along. So anybody that wants to donate, that'd be great. If you have a particular interest in this project, or if you're sitting in your home unit wanting to do something similar, I would love to sort of spread the knowledge about how this works and how to do this to other units and other organizations, because I do think we all know that flying these old airplanes is a privilege and something that we have to take care of. And doing that means if we want to do it for a long time, we're going to have to think of some innovative tools to really make sure we're using the resources that these airplanes represent well. And so this is sort of our little effort to kind of move that ball forward a little bit. And there are no secrets here. We'd like to teach as many people that want to do this kind of stuff how to do it. So I'd love to spread the word there.
Excellent. Joe, Eric, thank you very much for being with us tonight. And to all of our audience members, thanks for the questions and for hanging out with us and taking a look at this That's All Brother Junior flight simulator. It really is a project that's come from a static piece of an airplane to almost a living, breathing creature, and ready to continue spreading the CAF mission. So again, thanks to you and to all the members of the Central Texas unit. By the way, if you have any feedback or thoughts on future topics, just send Leah Block an email at media@cafhq.org. Until next time, I'm Steve Buss. Thanks for joining us here on CAF Warbird 2. Have a good night.